very inefficient. So what we do at Open Water is we hire talent for you and we pay their salaries for 3 months. So as a result, we help early stage startups that could first not source talent, and then they also cannot afford talent. We help those startups get talent faster. The second thing that we do is we host founder dinners. Similar to Y Combinator, you guys just heard Michael speak at founders dinners. We have weekly dinners where founders talk about their problems. We finally hold office hours where you can talk to me and the other partners of Open Water. We hold office hours twice a week. You can just stop in and talk about your problem. We also have weekly calls every single founder. And finally, we invest. We're raising a fund right now to provide capital as well as talent. So I'll tell you a bit more about what we do. Let's first talk about what we invest in. So at Open Water, we're looking for companies in these 3 verticals: enterprise SaaS, fintech, and consumer social. Here's our thesis for each of these things. For consumer social, we believe that the social network of the future is going to be private by default, and it's going to drive offline interaction. For fintech, we're looking to increase access to financial technology, and we're also looking for any sort of technology that you used to have to talk to a banker in person, but you can now do on the phone. Finally, for enterprise SaaS, we're looking for B2B applications that are 10% better than the incumbent. We believe, it seems pretty obvious, but if it's a 10% better application, you create a lot more value than 10%. Finally, the average Open Water startup has raised between $50,000 and $850,000 in pre-seed financing. Why we do this is we look for companies that are a bit further along than Y Combinator. We look for companies that are starting to stall, and we can help jumpstart and supercharge their growth. Our ideal company has a feature backlog. What that means is that they have a list of features that their customers really want, but they don't have enough time to build it. So we look for, and one of the things we main interview for is this feature backlog. Since when you have a backlog, the day that we give you 3 more engineers, you can suddenly push more features, get your existing customers to charge more money, and then also start getting new customers. Finally, we look for upsell and underdogs. We look for people that, for whatever reason, people are betting against, and we also look for people you can upsell your existing customers. So you have a small group of loyal customers that want more features. We give you the engineers to build them, and for some reason, people are betting against you. So let me tell you just about the story of Open Water, the problems that we saw, and then why we started the Startup Accelerator. So first, we started Open Water this May, and it was due to COVID. The first problem we saw is that talented builders were out of work. We saw internships were getting canceled for master's students and undergraduate students. Talented engineers were being laid off from companies like Airbnb and Uber. So we saw all of these students out of work and felt like we had to do something. The other thing that we saw is that it was becoming harder to fundraise. This is not true right now, but Sequoia published a black swan memo, and everyone was quickly rushing to raise extension rounds. So suddenly we had this weird dynamic where not only was it hard for startup to fundraise, but also we had all these talented people out of work. The third problem is a macro issue. Tech companies do not want to hire undergraduates and recent graduates. They want to hire people with startups. They want to hire at least people with 3 to 4 years of experience at large tech companies, because after graduating your undergraduate education, you don't really know how to code. You might understand algorithms pretty well, but you don't understand best practices. So we took all of these problems. We have these super talented people out of work. It's hard to fundraise, and there's a lack of talent since everyone's going after the same 3 people that work at these large tech companies for their early stage first engineers. So that's kind of how we came up with the idea of Open Water. So at Open Water, again, we're investing talent, not capital. So we're taking these early stage startups that raise $50,000 to $850,000. We give them 5 engineers, designers, and growth hackers. With these growth hackers and engineers, we're able to push more features, sell to more customers, and then come and demo day at 3 months, raise your next round at higher valuation. This is kind of a fundamental shift of the model that Y Combinator created, and Michael talked about with the Startup Accelerator. And we think that our models could be more successful. So these are the 3 things that we saw that led to starting it. One thing that we should mention is master's students. So we were able to get a lot of highly qualified engineers. The reason we do this is we targeted master's students that lost their internships. These master's students have already been in industry for 3 to 4 years, so they had the qualifications to work at a startup. As a result, we recruited hundreds of these master's students. Then we also paired them with undergraduate students, and the master's students helped upskill that undergraduate students, teach them best practices, so they were able to work on teams and be successful at startups. So one of the cool things about Open Water is how we hire. So again, we hire at scale. We have 15 portfolio companies. This cohort, we have 20, and we're trying to hire roughly 100 to 120 engineers. So since we're dealing with scale, we have to do everything pretty quickly. So we completely threw out the traditional model of hiring. We don't ask for resumes, we don't do algorithmic questions, and our interviews are only 15 minutes long. So what we do is we do a coding test. The first thing we ask you to get an interview, again, since we don't ask you for your resume, we ask you in 2 sentences, describe what's the most important thing that you've ever built and what's the coolest thing you built. Then between that, we're looking for builders. So if you build something cool, we send you a 15-minute interview. We ask you some more personal questions. We make sure to see if you're the type of person you want to work with. If you are, we then ask for your GitHub portfolio. If you've already built cool side projects and you post them on GitHub, we review your portfolio and then we'll send you an offer letter. If you have not done cool side projects, what we do is we ask you to do a coding test. Our coding tests are pretty long. The classic coding test we give is we ask you to build a clone of Hacker News. Why we do this is we want to make sure that everyone's a hacker, everyone can build really well. But finally, the one thing we don't look, you see right there, we don't look for classroom coders. The classroom coder is what we think typical undergraduate is that has a CS degree. The typical undergraduate right now in American universities, really good at algorithms, has A's in all their CS classes, but has no side projects. We look for people that have side projects and love to build. If we see you don't have side projects, you have the chance to build your Hacker News clone. And if you don't build the clone, you don't get an interview. And you don't get an offer letter. So this is kind of how we're able to hire at scale. So here's a bit about our first cohort at Open Water. So we took in 15 companies. We have 80 builders that, again, we only met them for 15 minutes before hiring them. And of these 80 companies, of these 15 companies, 4 raised their seed rounds after just 3 months in our program, and 2 companies failed. So here's kind of what we learned from these failures and lessons. The first lesson that we learned was idea versus team. When I was selecting the first Open Water cohort, I prioritized ideas. I really looked for visionaries that were working on cool products. The one thing that I neglected, although ideas are important, ideas are really cheap. It's all about your execution. As a result, I led in some teams with great ideas, had weak teams, and ultimately they failed. Now, this kind of led, again, if you go on Twitter, everyone's always talking about idea versus team. I truly believe now that it's all about your execution and your team. So that's kind of the first thing I learned, that always choose a strong team over an idea. Next thing I learned is good news travels quickly. With these startups, we have weekly meetings where we meet the founders every single week throughout the 3-month period in the cohort. If there was good news, the closest sale, I'd learn about 5 minutes after. They'd call me, send me a text, send me a Slack message. If something bad was happening, if there's bad news, sometimes it would take me weeks to find out. Now, again, as an investor, I want to help. I think I have valuable insight. If not, if I don't have insight, I could connect them to someone that could help. But I found that people were always trying to hide bad news from us. So how we're fixing this for the second cohort is we're making everyone publish weekly investor updates. The weekly investor updates, you have to write 3 things that are going well, 2 things that are going poorly, 1 thing you've learned this week. You have to send it to us every Monday morning. As a result, we're trying to change the stigma over things that are going poorly, get talking about them, and then on our weekly meetings, we help you fix and discuss what's going poorly. The next thing is ABS. Always be shipping and always be selling. What we found is we had some super talented teams. They were very technical and they're working on cool products, but they wouldn't ship. They'd spend months iterating on the product, waiting if it would be perfect. One of the things we like to say is if your MVP is perfect, like if you aren't embarrassed by your MVP, you've waited too long to ship. So we just said, we want you to be shipping every single week, if not 2 weeks. So, but since you're shipping continuously, you're always somewhat embarrassed of the product. It's never fully done. But once you release the stigma of shipping, then you're able to do it much faster. Since what happens with founders a lot of the time is they have this idea in their head and their MVP is not going to be their perfect vision. It's not going to be the idea in their head. And since it doesn't meet up to the version of their head, they don't ship. They keep delaying and working on more features. We said you always have to be shipping. By putting 2-week sprints on it or 1-week sprint, it just makes sure we have continuous product releases and something actually gets on there. The second thing is always be selling. Even before you've built the product, you should be selling. So I'll kind of talk a bit more of that in my advice to starting companies as a student later on. So here's kind of how we grew Open Water, which I think can apply to growing your own startup as well. So here's how we grew so quickly. Again, I told you earlier I wrote a newsletter. All of Open Water's success was based off this newsletter. So what I do is I cold email the top founders in tech and top investors. I interview them for about 25 minutes. I write it up in a QA format and send it out. We grew this newsletter to over 70,000 subscribers. So how we did this is we started with people that were looking for summer internships. We just made a LinkedIn post, the post went viral, people started commenting their emails. So we posted summer internships and just sent out a newsletter to that. We then added the interviews in and added a referral program to the newsletter. And then we quickly grew to 70,000 subscribers, one of the largest newsletters in the country over just a period of a couple of weeks. So here's why the newsletter is so important. The newsletter gives us access. So the first thing the newsletter gives us is access to investors. So we spend time, once or twice a week interviewing top VC investors. The first thing it does is we get to learn their mindset and then improve ourselves as investors. The second purpose of that is that by interviewing investors, we know what type of companies they're looking for. So we've now built this network of really talented investors at top tier firms. And when one of our portfolio companies matches their thesis, we make sure to introduce them. Since we've already had about a 20-minute conversation with them, we know exactly what companies they're looking for and what would go well. And once we make a good introduction, it gives us more credit as well. The next thing is deal flow. We interview top investors and startup founders. As a result, with the content we produce, it attracts more founders that are starting early stage companies or students that want to start early stage companies. As a result, we're able to get great deals that come in through the newsletter. Our subscribers, we close every single email with. If you're working on a early stage startup, please tell us about it. And we get about 50 emails a week of different people working in different early stage startups. And anyone that sounds good, cool, you just hop on a call with. So that's one thing that we did. Finally, mentors. Since we're working and talking to all these startup founders, when we interview an early stage startup founder, they always want to help. So that's one of the cool things about the startup community. Everyone's down to help each other. So as a result, if we're talking to an early stage founder and we think that they're could use one of our portfolio companies, we make the intro, and then that early stage founder can mentor one of our portfolio companies. So the next thing that we're starting in Open Water is this fall, we're launching Open Water University. So this goes back to the core problem that Open Water is trying to solve. And the problem is that startups don't want to hire new grad engineers. The reason that people don't want to hire new grad engineers is not because you aren't smart, it's just because you don't know best practices in coding. What they do is they want to hire FANG engineers, so Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google. These engineers have worked at Facebook, 3 to 4 years, all these companies. What they know that you don't know is essentially they have best practices of coding, so they comment their code well, they are very good with GitHub, and they write unit tests. That's pretty much the only thing that separates them from you guys as undergraduates. So the issue with this is all these FANG engineers have unvested stock, meaning that it's going to take a while for their stock to become available so they can sell it. As a result, they don't want to leave their companies. So what happens is it becomes very difficult as a startup to hire because you don't want to hire new grads and you only want to hire these people at these cushy big tech jobs. So as a result, it's hard to get them to leave their job. So like the joke is, our solution is that we upskill MIT engineers. So we take engineers, again, these builders, the most talented people in the country, we run them through a 3-week course. In this 3-week course, it's taught by some of our previous founders. We talk about GitHub best practices, how to comment your code well, also how to make test cases that run well, how to deploy to AWS, best practices with the cloud and cloud security. So just a couple simple things that are not taught in your undergraduate education. With this skill, this 3-week program, we're able to upskill you and get you to the point where you actually could take an entry-level job at a startup and you have the best practice knowledge to pass their interview test, where otherwise you would not. So this Open Water University is launching this first fall, again, later this fall, probably about our first cohort will be in the spring, and we're going to be upskilling college students. Afterwards, we'll send you a link if you'd like to apply. It'll be completely free. Even if you don't choose to work at an Open Water company, it'll be a great experience for you guys. And what it's going to do is teach you exactly how people code, not what you're doing in the classroom, but how real software is built. Finally, another thing we're doing at Open Water is right now we're raising a fund. We're raising a $3 million rolling access fund. So what rolling access means is that instead of taking all the money up front, we take the money every single quarter. So we're continuously closing. So how are funds different? It's a bit small at $3 million. The second thing is our LPs are going to be entrepreneurship centers at universities. So no one's ever really done this before. So here's kind of what we're thinking. We're going to have entrepreneurship centers cut checks from $50,000 to $100,000 a year to invest in our fund. Why would you invest in our fund? Because it gives you access to the early stage startup ecosystem. So if I'm the head of an entrepreneurship center, my goal is to get my students involved in early stage startups. By investing, we open up a talent pipeline between your university and Open Water. As a result, we start taking more students from your university and we upskill them in Open Water. We then place them at these rocket ship early stage startups. Every startup that we take has raised between $50,000 and $850,000. They have 2 to 3 employees. These all could be the next Uber. Who really knows? So what you're able to do is you're able to place students at a rocket ship startup. Even if the startup fails, it's still a great experience from the great entrepreneurial venture. The next thing too is that you also give your alumni access to the angel network. So what that means is all of these alumni groups of different universities now, they have angel networks where they try to invest in alums. If you have, I'll just say you guys are all, Ivy League. If a Yale student works as the third employee in the startup, he can then say that he's an employee, so the Yale alumni group can actually invest in the startup. So it's good for the startup since it opens up more angel dollars. It's good for the alumni since they now have this opportunity to invest in a super cool early stage startup. So this is kind of just the overall why entrepreneurship centers want to invest in this. The last thing too is it's an easy way to get a win, because some of these entrepreneurship centers, you can't have students be starting large companies every single year. Startups, again, as Michael said, are very hard. As a result, you're able to place students at already successful early stage startups. It's much easier to get students involved and excited about entrepreneurship, even if they're not starting their own companies. For the other people that are LP in our fund, so by LP, they're investing in our $3 million fund, are later stage funds. Why later stage funds are investing in our fund is the same idea, just to get access to our deal flow. Since we invest in early stage startups, pre-seed to seed stage, we're gonna have some Series A funds putting in money as well, just so they get first look at all our startups. Finally, we're gonna have some micro LPs. One of the cool things about these rolling access funds is that you're able to have small LPs. So as a result, we're gonna have just people on Twitter that we've met that can talk to us. All right, now, next thing we're gonna talk about is kind of our advantage. And then we'll get to, I wanna start a company. So, why would these people invest in Open Water? Me and the co-founder Alex, we're both young. We both recently dropped out of college. Why are people going to give us millions of dollars to manage? So our advantage is first, we have great engineers and we can match them to our portfolio companies. People want to take our money since we have this engineering talent that we upskill through Open Water University, and we can help early stage startups grow faster. What every startup needs, or most startups need, is more people to build, and we can provide that. Next thing is that we have a scout network. We have a scout network across 6 universities across the country. Not only are we able to get early stage deals and early access, the second thing that we're able to do with the scout network is we're able to beta test apps. So we have a consumer social app that's in this cohort right now. It's still in stealth, so I can't tell you much about it. But what we were able to do is we sent the app to our entire scout network. Everyone beta tested it, wrote a report on why it was good, what features were bad, and then we implemented that. So we have a cool feedback loop as well. Finally, we have a waitlist API and test flight analytics. Right now, we just gave it to our portfolio company, but we're going public. This technology allows you to quickly open up a waitlist and monitor the people that are using your product to figure out who really likes it. And finally, as we said earlier, we have our newsletter with 70,000 subscribers, and we get hundreds of deals a week because people love our newsletter and really want to tell us about what they're working on. So now I'll just try to assume what's interesting about you guys. If you want to start a company, here's kind of my advice for you guys. So here's, I guess, the steps I would go through as starting a company as a student. The first thing I would do for starting a company is start a waitlist. By starting a waitlist, you put up a landing page online, you explain what your product is, and then you just start texting it to people. You start cold emailing people, and you figure out who wants to use this product. So that's the first thing. Next thing after you do, you start cold emailing this waitlist of people, and you start getting on the phone for customer discovery calls. You figure out who's your end user and why do they want to use my startup. Then once you've done this, then you actually assemble your team. So before you start building, you've already assembled a list of people that want to use your product, and you've already talked to a couple customers. Then you assemble the team, and you start building the product, and finally you launch. Your MVP should be something you're embarrassed about. So you launch before you think you're ready and start onboarding people from that wait list. Then finally, you pivot. You're probably going to be wrong the first time, but you pivot and then you start the process over and over again. One thing I cannot stress the importance of enough is starting a wait list. You have to start asking people if they like the product before you start building it. If you know, just an easy way to test product market fit before you can code anything and make sure the product you're working on is valid. So again, people asked Michael this question last time. If I'm interviewing you to admit you into the accelerator, here are some of the questions I ask. The first question is simple. What are you building? Why are you uniquely qualified to build it? We don't do pitch decks at Open Water. Most VC firms do. We just talk to you about the product. So you first have to be able to quickly, in 90 seconds, describe what you're building, why you're building it, and kind of the founding myth behind getting to here. The next question I ask is if everything goes right, where are you a year from now? So this kind of determines your overall vision. So if everything goes exactly right, how big can this idea get? So this is just honestly a fantasy exercise. You're saying exactly what verticals I'd expand into. And it's not valuable for investment really, since you're probably going to pivot by the time I give you money. But it's valuable since I can really get a chance to look into the founder's mindset and see how they think, how they approach the world, and how they can tackle this abstract problem a year out. It also shows that they're driven. They're real willing to work on this for multiple years, and they're already have a plan. Finally, the last thing I do is what would you do with 3 more engineers? One of the things that we're focused on Open Water is we're focusing on jumpstarting growth. So we want people with a pretty rich feature backlog. So again, the best answer to this is what you do with 3 more engineers. People start listing off 5 or 10 features. And why I really love this question is it gets us, gets us talking about product. So in a lot of these pitch meetings and with founders, you sometimes talk about the total addressable market, your go-to-market strategy. I don't really care about that. We're pretty product focused. So when you say what do you 3 more engineers, they start listing off features that they want to build. And if those features seem cool, we tend to invest in them. This is also another thing where you can see if people have the wrong idea. We were talking to a startup yesterday. They already raised a couple $1 million and they're an early stage startup. They also graduated from a pretty prestigious accelerator. So we asked them what we do 3 more engineers, and they start saying they're going to work on a video streaming engine. And we're saying, why don't you use a proprietary engine? And they're like, we want to build our own engine. So essentially, what I learned right now is that if they had 3 more engineers, they would waste 6 months building their own video engine versus just actually buying an engine that's already out there. So why I don't like this is it slows you down. I think it's okay to build an engine later on, but it shows you're focusing on the wrong things. The end user does not care if you have your own engine or if you're using Amazon's engine. Since they're focusing on building an engine, it means that their focus is not broad enough. They're not focusing on the end user and delivering value to the end user. So as a result, we passed on them. So I think it's a good idea to see what we do 3 more engineers just to get the priorities of a company. So a lot of people also ask, I want to be a VC. So here's what I say to everyone that asks I want to be a VC. We were talking in our next interview is Turner Novak in the fantasy portfolio. So what you have to do is create a fantasy portfolio of companies you're interested in, right? Look first to find the startups you like, write a blog post essentially saying why you like these startups and why you'd like to invest in them, how much you invest if you have the money, and just post it online. Then you can start emailing different VCs and you can ask them, cold emails, what they think your fantasy portfolio, if they like your reason to invest. You can also tell them, hey, if you haven't seen this company, please check it out. I think it's really cool. It's a great investment. This is also something that's really easy to talk about at interviews for venture capital. Because you're able to have this fantasy portfolio, you have, even if you haven't invested yourself again since you're a student, you're able to have something to talk about and something that differentiates you from other candidates. So if you want to break into VC, build a fantasy portfolio and blog about it online. The next thing to do, be an early adopter. Start using tech before everyone else. Always be on Twitter and Product Hunt looking for new ideas. If you like a product, email the founder, get on the phone with them, talk to them, learn why they're different. And again, if you think it's cool, write a blog post about it. Again, second thing, talk to founders. That goes to be an early adopter. Always try to get on a phone call with founders, learn about the process, why they found their company. The next thing you can do is you can scout for different funds. Open Water Accelerator has their own scout fund as well. A lot of different scout programs. It's a great way to gain exposure to early stage deals. And everything you're doing, always be blogging about online and write. Putting your writing online is the easiest way to gain clout and exposure to venture capital. Last thing I'll leave you on is be wary of Twitter. As you get into venture capital, you see a lot of VCs are on Twitter and they're trying to flex and get deal flow through Twitter. You do not need to be big on Twitter to have a career in venture capital. It is an easy way to spread your writing if you're blogging online, but I would not be too worried about being a big Twitter presence. The thing I'd really worry on is just blog online, create a fancy portfolio, and be talking to founders and using early products. If you're doing those three things, blogging, talking to founders, being early adopter products, you're going to find success. So that was kind of just a bit about me and about Open Water. If you're working on something cool, please send me an email at david@openwatervc.com. If you have any questions after this, if we have like a couple minutes for questions, I'd love to answer one or two. And again, send an email to me at david@openwatervc.com if you have any questions as well. Awesome, thanks.
Great, thank you so much, David. So for everyone that has a question for David, please feel free to reach out to him. Like he has his email listed on the screen. And for all of our hackers, we currently have an event that's just starting right now on Glimpse for those of you that are looking to build a team. So with that, I'd like to end just by giving a hand. Everyone give a hand for David and his presentation.
Grant, I have a question.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, is it possible to access a recording of this meeting?
I believe so. We're recording all of the info sessions and like the talks, and I believe we'll be posting them for the hackers to view in case they weren't able to view it live.
Oh yeah, where could I access that?
I'm currently not sure, but if you're in the Discord, feel free to send a message in the general, and I'm sure someone will direct you to like the right location.
All right, thank you.
Yep, no problem. Any last questions for David? All right, well, David, again, thank you so much for spending some time sharing all your experience and sharing some insight about the VC world. I'm sure all of our hackers had a great time learning about it.
Awesome, thanks for having me, Grant.
Yeah, no problem. All right, bye-bye, everyone.